I found tampons in my husband's car, and I wished he had been unfaithful instead so my kids wouldn't have to go through this. I'm a 29-year-old woman who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had any reason to suspect he was unfaithful or even dissatisfied with our marriage. He jokes that we're still in the honeymoon phase nearly 5 years in with 2 kids. I wouldn't have questioned that if I hadn't found a surprise in his car last month while buckling our daughter into her car seat. I noticed something wedged between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just a stray toy or a snack wrapper, so I reached down to pull it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used. A small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the item like evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year." His face stayed blank for a moment before realization hit. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to Fiona, his coworker. His initial confusion quickly shifted to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns, explaining it casually. "Probably Fiona," he said, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, hoping for some sign he understood why this bothered me. But there was nothing. No apology, no concern, just a casual dismissal. It felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It wasn't uncommon for my husband to carpool with coworkers, and we were both close to Fiona and her husband. I had never minded the idea of them carpooling. They were friends, after all. We often socialized, spending weekends at each other's homes for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over the challenges of balancing work and family life while our kids played together. I reassured myself the tampon could have easily slipped out of her purse during one of these outings. No big deal. Maybe it fell out while she was grabbing her phone or wallet, jostled around in the process. It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual, so I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I managed to forget about it until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple of weeks later. I genuinely wanted to believe my husband, but I couldn't shake how the tampon had been tucked in the seat and how he seemed to regard it so casually. Maybe he was just playing dumb. I did something I now feel kind of crazy for. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the one I'd found in the back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon was probably the same one, and likely there was an innocent explanation for why it had been left there in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of these out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer. I felt physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the possibility that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to discover. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she risk giving herself away by offering me one the other night? I wanted to talk to my husband about this, but I felt too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the backseat one I had discarded, and they were a match, just different absorbencies. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters could have found them. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona, either messing with my husband or me, or both. Confronting either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it became a waiting game from there, watching my husband for any changed behavior, but there was none. I scanned our house for misplaced foreign items, but there were none. Even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, partly why he was inclined to believe the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most activities during the week. I felt some consolation in that until my younger daughter, too, came down with something last week, and then I felt differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted I stay at work while he took care of her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband thought it was a good sign he could take time off on short notice. By then, we were all starting to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see my nearly healthy child and a husband helping her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I know what my kids wear day to day, and especially what clothes they have. I'd sworn off full-length sleep suits with snaps long before we had our second. The snaps are just a pain for quick diaper changes. It's not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows that. He doesn't shop for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them. So I was bewildered and floored at the thought of someone being around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice and went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He looked confused, just like before, and asked why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out with accusations right then, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was off. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't seen anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing our daughter's hair with her in the room. With my emotions all over the place, I decided to let it go. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now. I drove myself half crazy with explanations that didn't add up. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with accusations and half-baked guesses. I'd become so absorbed in paranoia and misery that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids as I should have been. Since I wasn't getting answers, I decided to pull the trigger on hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the setup at mine. Before the cameras were even delivered, though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves amidst the chaos. There was a palpable sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all part of this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I dove into our workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. Yet a strange feeling clung to me, intensifying when I got a notification on my phone, a ring alert from the front door. I clicked the video, half expecting to see a delivery person or neighbor, but what I saw left me stunned. A young woman was on my doorstep, leading my daughter inside, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind. My heart raced as I processed this. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, lived 2 states away with a court order preventing her from being here. Panic surged through me as I struggled to understand the situation. Was this a mistake, a misunderstanding, or something far more sinister? A knot formed in my stomach as I realized the answers might be more troubling than I ever imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my heart pounding as I watched this nightmare unfold. There on the footage from our Ring doorbell was a scene I couldn't comprehend. I hadn't seen her in years, yet there she was, leading my youngest daughter into our home, hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind. The shock rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare, and my husband was at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again, my sister-in-law. My initial reaction was disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, heart pounding, and dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang, there was no response. I texted him, asking what the hell this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, likely realizing he had messed up by coming through the front door. By the fifth or sixth call, he finally picked up. The woman on the camera was indeed my husband's sister, as I would later find out, the likely source of both the tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She was also registered as someone with a history of abuse and a recovering addict who had coerced the silence of another family member after she had hurt them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from how my husband spoke about her, I didn't expect to again. But here she was, in our home with our children. It wasn't just the shock of her sudden appearance that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence meant. My sister-in-law, fresh from another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of it hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deep deception and betrayal. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair, yet somehow felt infinitely more disgusting, knowing who it was and why all of this was happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law wanted to reconnect and make amends with those she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or worse, to try to keep our children away from her, so they had been meeting in secret, often at our house while I was at work. They would enter through the garage in my husband's car to avoid the Ring camera at the front door. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night one weekend while I was away on a business trip, sleeping in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband claimed he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he lied and the ease with which he kept this secret made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls clothes, dressing my youngest in the onesie and bow my husband had promised I'd picked out myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, with a tiny clip in her hair, felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal unfolding right under my nose. Yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, seeking a glimmer of hope amid uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting it was all in my head that I was overreacting to harmless coincidences. He swore this was all imaginary, the tampons, the onesie, the bow. He seemed perfectly content to watch me agonize over a woman he insisted didn't exist, shrugging off each unsettling discovery as if it were new to him, telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I'd given birth, despite me sharing that one of my biggest fears about motherhood was suffering from PPD like my mother had with me. I worried about not being fully present for our babies and being left with guilt as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, the truth remained stubbornly elusive. My patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, gaslighting me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, and that I needed to step back and reevaluate my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and no other version of events made sense. But after a month of this mind game, all I had to show for my trust was this pathetic situation and a lot of anger. When confronted, my husband failed to explain himself. He stammered, stumbling over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, claiming his sister just wanted to make amends. Yet his words were disjointed and unconvincing, each excuse more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger, hiding behind a facade of lies. I watched as he avoided eye contact, shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or the deceit that tainted our marriage. Each time he spoke, I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized our children's safety. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The shock and desperation on his face were almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from further harm. Ending the relationship and filing for divorce was both heartbreaking and empowering. Acknowledging that our 7-year journey had come to such a bitter end was devastating, yet liberating as I took control of my life and prioritized my well-being and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. Countless court sessions drained me, forcing me to relive the pain and betrayal repeatedly. My husband fought me at every turn, refusing to accept responsibility and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband told to cover his tracks. I presented the ring footage showing her entering our home with my children and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. I remained focused on the bigger picture, emphasizing my husband's deceit and the undeniable breach of trust. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of our daughters while my husband received supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.